Imagine buying this collection and just being like, I wonder what it's about. Because the back of this collection has no description as to anything outside of who made the film. It's just production credits. Like, that's what the back of the case looks like. Now, no criticism, of course. Like, you see a Nightmare on Elm Street collection, you should probably have an idea. They even emphasize that in a lot of documentaries and the special features that is presented on a lot of these discs. You realize that they emphasize that Freddy Krueger is a household name. And so that's why today we are going to do a calm and relaxed talk about the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. Not including the 2000s, I don't remember what year it was, sometime in the 2000s. I think it was 2010 actually, the remake. It's not a part of this collection. I don't ever plan to watch it. I've never heard a good word about it. So I don't really care to explore it. I guess it was just kind of coming for a big craze when, they redid the Friday the 13th, they were redoing Halloween, let's make gritty remakes of everything because we have CGI blood now. Woo! They don't have that in these, though. Well, they do have some CGI, but not CGI blood, which is fun. So, after one of my recent ones, the Friday the 13th collection, I did get a comment on Reddit just kind of arguing that I should talk more about the production stuff in the films, which is fair enough. Like, you expect that when it comes to, I'm going to do a franchise review, that I'm going to talk about some production elements. So I have actually, and I did actually watch all of the all of the special features that are presented on these discs, including the final discs. The final disc is the Fear Himself, the Life and Crimes of Freddy Krueger, which is a 30-minute doco. And the disc also actually comes with 2 episodes of the TV show, which I skimmed through the first episode, didn't care much for it. And it had 2 other really strange collections of other interviews and stuff. So that's a bit. I just kind of skimmed those as well. It didn't really seem to matter. They kind of just kept repeating information I already knew from earlier docos. And of course, it has the Never Sleep Again documentary. It doesn't have the full version, of course, in this. On the first disc, which has the first Nightmare on Elm Street film, it actually has, the first 50-odd minutes for the documentary, because that was dedicated to the original film, which I figured was kind of good enough. I do have a brief review of that clip, so I'll get to that in a second. But yeah, so don't expect in this Calm and Relax series to be an exploration of the production of films, because most franchises are very long, and most of these videos get very long because of that. So as much as I could see it as a criticism that I don't know the character names, or that I don't know all the production details behind all the films, mostly that was a criticism from the Friday the 13th film, which I consider is fair enough. But it's very warm today. In fact, it's about 30-odd degrees because it's summer heat. Very annoying. So I just want to kind of get into it. I really actually like this franchise as well. So with the potential criticism of but you don't know the character names and this and that. Jesus Christ, 36 degrees. Fuck. Anyway, the factor of you don't know the character names and you don't know this and that. It's my memory is really shit with character names. It always has been. This comes to, sometimes actor names, director names, even musicians. Sometimes I don't even know what band I'm listening to, but I like the song. Or I know what the band is, but I don't know what the song is. It's just a me thing. It's not I don't like these films enough to remember who the actors are. I just don't always remember who the actors are. So, I apologize about that. So, let's get into it. It's a lot of draw-up. I guess a little brief history. I had never seen any of these films till about maybe, I think about 3 years ago. I think it was just after I'd gotten my first job. I bought this set, which is a beautiful collection, I must add. it was interesting because I was getting more into a horror craze, but I was also getting into a surrealism craze, mostly from David Lynch. And so to see this franchise go from like, oh, it's slasher, but it's kind of surreal as well because it's dream stuff. But then like the franchise develops, especially from Dream Warriors onwards, into this more surrealist dreamscape stuff. And I'm like, this is actually pretty cool. Not all the films, of course, are great, but I actually really like this franchise, and I think each film is uniquely different, which is rare for a franchise. Like, of course, by its second to final one, Freddys Dead, which is my least. It's the only one of the franchise I don't like to watch because I don't like it at all. But I like all the rest of the films. They all have at least something going for them, even if maybe the characters are crappy or Freddy Krueger isn't great or this or that. But for the most part, they all work really well. So let's get into my review, which I actually had written all of it down on my laptop. A Nightmare on Elm Street from 1984, written and directed by Wes Craven, a director who I'm pretty familiar with as well. Obviously from Scream, I've seen Swamp Thing and Hills Have Eyes as well, so he's definitely got a very jumpy horror background, which I rather like, you know. So this, of course, was the first film, low-budget horror film, which you kind of can't really tell, but sometimes it's like, I don't know, I think with 80s films, they have this aesthetic that, like, sometimes if it's a low budget, you can't always tell, and sometimes that's great about it, but sometimes it depends, because, like, you have to remember, like, in a lot of these films, they had to build a lot of these sets, and, like, the house that they live in the first one especially, the whole entire inside was constructed, like, there are so many aspects of these films, especially because all the effects are practical, that they really had to go all out. And, like, I mean, even the Evil Dead franchise, that's all low-budget stuff, and you look at what they pull off, and it's incredible. So, of course, I gave the film a whopping 4 stars. My quote, of course, as I always put in, it's just a nightmare. I actually had added a little bit of detail about myself in this. I said, I've been sleeping poorly lately, so I figured this film could help. It is true, of course, I had actually been sleeping quite poorly, but that was just more or less because I was like, oh, it was the start of a new year, the heat was getting to me, all this kind of stuff. It's a summer in Australia during January, in case you didn't know. Additionally, I think the tone and mood of this film is very effective. I still don't get scared by slasher films. It's a deficit on myself, but I like watching them. I just have never been scared by a slasher film. Maybe... No, I can't remember a single slasher film I've ever been scared by. Even when I was a kid, slashers just never got me. But, of course, I still like the atmosphere that this film presents for its use of direction and lighting and sound design, plus music. They all work really well, especially in the remastered 5.1. It is gorgeous. I kind of talked about how the film had a theme of teen suicide, but more or less this film focuses less on, oh, it's the teens are killing themselves, and more of, there's a serial killer going around killing all the teenagers kind of deal. So there kind of is that kind of theme to it, which is interesting, that they turn it more on the head of, oh, it's a serial killer not doing it, not it's the teens doing it to themselves, which of course they redo in the third one, where they focus it a lot more on teen suicide. And of course, I really, really like Freddy Krueger. I think his position in this film, I think this film is my favorite with him in it. The third one is probably my second favorite, just because I like the surrealist elements that they bring in, like the dream elements, and like how he eats up one of the characters, and all these kind of, you know, it's prime time, it's that level stuff. You know, he becomes more of an icon in the terms of, oh, you can see him fully in light, and you'll still be scared by him, but he'll also be whacking out these zingers and stuff while killing kids. It's interesting. Whereas, of course, the first film, it's more or less he's kind of just this creepy, in the shadows, perverted, you know, child killer, who, of course, you find out is also a child molester, or was while he was alive. And that makes it even, of course, much more fucked up, but much more interesting. And I think Wes Craven's whole film, from the conception of this idea of a killer coming to you in your dreams to, of course, its execution, was really kind of genius and really reinvented a genre that had been dying out rather quickly. And this is like a genre, the slasher genre, that had started with not started, but had been properly reinvigorated with Halloween from 1978, whereas, you get 6 years later, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and suddenly you're like, everyone's tired of slasher films, because it's all you're getting. There's, like, Friday the 13th, the franchise, there's the Halloween franchise, and then there's all these one-offs. You've got, you have Black Christmas in the 70s, but, like, now you've got, like, Prom Night, and just all of these other, Sleepaway Camp, and all these other films that are just slasher films. Some of them are really good, and can be really unique with a really unique killer, like Black Christmas or Sleepaway Camp. But for the most part, it's still just a bunch of teens are going to get killed off. Some of them will flash their tits, some of them will have sex. It doesn't really matter. Like, if you watch the Friday the 13th franchise, you realize all the films are the same. But some of them have uniquely distinct kills and can still be really interesting and fun to watch. Like, I'm not expecting to watch the Friday the 13th films as I did, and I didn't expect to get art out of this. But it's like, in terms of horror and slasher, it's still pretty fun. Even if the characters aren't always great, and even if the kills aren't always great, but then sometimes they all are, and they can always combine to be something great. But this franchise, of course, does something completely different. Because, of course, oh look, it's in your nightmares now. Usually I recap, like, the plot of the film, but look, you've either watched the films or you haven't. If you haven't watched the films and you don't want spoilers for the rest of the franchise, probably tune out, watch the franchise, and then come back. If you don't care about spoilers, or like the general gist or whatever, I'm not going to go into a lot of plot details. Some kill details I might go into, but for the most part, and there's also like stuff for Freddy's backstory and stuff, but that's just like kind of almost seems retconned in for later films. Doesn't really matter. I guess, what is there to note in terms of actors? I like all the characters. I like how Wes Craven kind of introduces what he does in Scream, with like having like, we've got this like, for one thing, blonde, but like attractive, young girl who's gonna be the lead of the film until, oh no, what? She gets killed off in like the first 20, 30 minutes in a really surreal way. Like, this is, I should look up there. I actually feel bad for at least the first film not knowing what their names are. Tina, of course, played by Amanda Weiss. Her character, I don't really care much about the characters half the time in the films, but sometimes you do care about these ones. You're like, they've been having bad dreams. What's going on? You're having the same bad dreams I'm having now. That's impossible. If Johnny Depp says that you can't be having the same dream, then obviously he must be right. And of course, her first death scene, which is also after the first sex scene, and the only sex scene in this film, she's in her dream and she gets stabbed in the belly, which is kind of the usual thing for Freddy Krueger with his claw hand, I should say, would stab you in the chest, and that would pretty much be how you die. Most people die that way in this franchise as it is, which is kind of annoying, but a lot of the rest of them are like really cool kills. And of course, she goes rolling around the room, on the roof and stuff, and it's cool. It's really well done. The practical effects of having the tumbling room, having the actor being glued in spot, and everything else being glued down to where it is, so nothing else will rotate. It's incredible. Just like when Johnny Depp's character gets killed off, like him going into the bed and all the blood splounging out. That's what I think the Never Sleep Again thing really gets right, where it talks about those details, which of course is always fun. It's like, oh, how did they pull off that? That's how they did it. Wow. And of course, because this was so low budget, a lot of the special effects for it, some of the scenes even Wes didn't even direct. Like, I know Robert Shea, and I find it's the most hilarious, Robert Shea, the producer of the whole franchise, who was the reason why the franchise really exists outside of course, Wes Craven's idea and writing and directing, he was the main guy who got all the money for it and whatever, but this being Robert Shea, he really wanted to have the scene where she's running up the stairs and her feet are like falling into the stairs, like some kind of weird marshmallow pit. And Wes was just like, I don't have the time or the budget to do it, but you can film it. So he filmed it and he directed it, and I really like the scene. I like how they reprise that in A New Nightmare as well. Yeah, it's interesting that they have like the whole, the parents aren't going to talk about it or whatever, your dreams can't happen. The whole discussion about dreams and things coming out of your dreams and all this kind of stuff, I think it's really cool. All this stuff, really silly. It's all been talked about before. I think it's really interesting. I think it's a really cool film. I love Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger. He's great. I think really the whole cast is pretty fun. The ending is kind of bananas. Like, obviously Wes Craven wanted to be a simple ending of, like, she beats him because she's not scared of him anymore, which they kind of retcon out later because it's like, I mean, if... I guess the ending doesn't really matter when you get to, like, the third film, when, of course, Nancy comes back, but, like, it's also the factor of, oh, you have to actually defeat him properly. You can't just be like, I'm not scared of you anymore, because by Freddys Dead, none of the characters are scared by him. And it's like, look, if you're not scared, then I'm not scared, and then he's not scary anymore. And that is logical as to a way to kill off the villain. Very clever for this film. Instead of just having their head get chopped off, or they blow up, or they actually don't get killed off, they run away or some crap. But to have it like this, where she just turns her back on him and she's like, I'm not scared of you anymore, and she walks away and he just, like, collapses into this, back into the dream realm, pretty much. Depends how you want to interpret it. Either he gets disintegrated, like he just kind of, him as an idea just dies, or he goes back into the dream realm. And then, of course, she wakes up and it's like, oh, look, it's her mum's back again, who didn't burn alive somehow. And all the kids that died are back. It's like, but is this a dream? But then Freddy's thing comes up and, you know, oh, it's freaky. And I've watched all of the alternative endings, and the ending we got is definitely the best one that there is. But it makes it more elusive, and obviously that's what they were going for, because, of course, Robert says, like, hey, we could potentially make a franchise out of this. Let's make sure we don't kill off the villain. And it kind of makes it a more unique ending, I think, to add this whole, oh, maybe she was asleep the whole time and it was all a dream, but maybe this part's a dream. Oh, we don't know, because it's, like, very loose, which is fine. Now, for this Never Sleep Again factor, of course, the documentary that they showed on the disc went for about 40 to 50 minutes. It was definitely really interesting for what it delved into in the first film, and I wish that they had the rest of the films discussed in every other disc, but obviously, they just, from what I could tell, they just kind of cut out snippets and put them in like the rest of the discs, but didn't bring the full doco, which I think was the point of, like, oh, hey, we'll put the first part of it in, you know, on the Nightmare on Elm Street Blu-ray, and then, because that's a film that we all love the most, and we can put that on, and then it's cool, and then we don't have to cut it out for any special features. And then people, you know, big fans will be like, oh, I'm going to buy the Never Sleep Again doco so I can watch the whole, like, 3 to 4 hour long documentary on it. Which I'd like to watch, but I don't know if I ever will. I think it was maybe edited a bit for the Blu-ray, because the version I saw, because the first, like, half of it was very cut up and choppy, and the editing was really poor, but it seemed like they were just going for main areas without talking about the sequels that much. And the second half was actually really good because it kind of all flowed better. So, regardless of the version I saw, I think that the documentary is probably really good, and I'd like to see it, but I probably never will. Mostly because you have to buy it, and I'm like, I don't really know if I want to do that. Like, I don't think I'm that big a fan of this franchise. I like it. I like watching the movies. I think the special features have enough detail but could have gone more into it, but really it touches on exactly what you expect it to. And then we get into Freddys Revenge from 1985. So, this was written by David Chaskin and directed by Jack Shoulder. I gave it 3 stars, which this was initially my least favorite. Definitely isn't. I will go through my ranking at the end of the video. Hopefully I'll remember that element. My review, of course, my quote, "Our screams were all he needed." Oh, spooky. So this film definitely lacks the tense narrative and overall compelling story that the original had. However, its use of lighting, practical effects, and dogs with human faces? Yeah, it's weird. But it makes it all worth it in the end. I do like how they kind of try to explore different elements to the character of Freddy Krueger. But still, there is, of course, this homoerotic subtext to the film that, of course, has made it a cult classic and a cult favorite. It's like, oh, I mean, my colleague Dave, who's watched all these films, his 2 favorites are, I'm trying to remember if he said it was Freddys Dead was one of his favorites. He definitely said that, maybe he kept getting confused, but he was saying that Freddys Revenge is one of his favorites. I think with maybe the first or the third one, but he was definitely saying Freddys Revenge was one of his favorites, which I'm like, interesting. Like, you don't hear that too often, that Freddys Revenge is someone's favorite. But of course, it does have this subtextual, element of the homoerotic stuff, which I think is really interesting. It's very there when you see it. I think it's not as on the nose as Top Gun, but it is definitely there, and it's definitely present. From like the BDSM stuff with the gay sports teacher, kind of gay, but they don't really say if he is. But still, the whole idea is there. And this is, of course, their gym teacher, and then like he confides a lot in his best mate, who they have a lot of kind of close scenes with, and all kinds of stuff like that. But of course, the main character still has the relationship with the female lead, which is kind of the point. I did think the opening. I mean, look, there are two scenes I really like in this film. I really like the opening on the bus and how just chaotic it gets. And then I do like the scene where after the pool party, when the main character is like, goes to his best mate's house, and he's like, oh, you gotta make sure I stay away because I know Freddy will come out and kill, because like Freddy's like using his body as a way to kill people, which is very different. Because of course the main character thinks it's all in his dreams, which makes it more surreal and makes it still seem dreamlike, even though in reality it isn't. But then of course you have that mixed with the element of, oh, hey, Freddy's now going to literally rip himself out of the main character, and the main character's going to just turn into him, and then all this more death and mayhem ensues. But of course, it is just the main character killing everyone. Freddy Krueger is just kind of controlling his mind, and puts the main character in a dream state to make him think that he is Freddy Krueger. And that makes it very interesting. I definitely like the practical effects and the lighting effects in this film. Why is there dogs with human faces? I don't know. It's fucking weird, but it's there and it's pretty cool. Of course, the pool party scene for me kind of ruins the film, because of course everyone's kind of noted, it kind of ruins the character of Freddy Krueger when you see him out in the daylight, and even Wes Craven was like, you got people there that are like so much taller than the actor, and it's just like, oh look, Freddy's smaller than people now. There's a reason why they have teenagers, not all these shorter teenagers than Robert Englund. So I would say that this is probably the most unique use of Freddy outside of the original film, as the rest of the franchise pins him against a group of teenagers, always in their dreams, rather than this film, which is like singularly on the main character, and it's all happening to him, and he's the one who's killing people. And I think that's really interesting. I think the whole, it's because he's in Nancy's old house, and, it's kind of now puts this connection on the house, not just on Elm Street. Of note, this was written before rewatching The Dream Child, which tackles a similar kind of character study element where you're mainly focusing on the one character, but of course, that film still has a group of people being killed. There isn't too much to note on the behind-the-scenes stuff. Like, obviously, they talk about the, subtextual gay stuff and the practical effects and the pool party, the reception of the pool party, I should say. But there's no, Never Sleep Again, documentary stuff and whatever. But I think the clips of the behind-the-scenes stuff is alright. Arguably, if you wanted to, you could skip this film. I don't think you should. Realistically, I wouldn't skip any of them except for maybe Freddys Dead. In reference to, the canon and referencing, does any film reference the second film? No. Does this film reference any film? It references the first film. Look, he's in the house that Nancy used to live in. Here's Nancy's diary that apparently she wrote. All that kind of, retcon and stuff. But it doesn't really have anything to do with the third one, so let's talk about the third one. Dream Warriors from 1987. Written by Wes Craven, Bruce Wagner, Frank Darabont, and Chuck Russell, and directed by Chuck Russell. I gave this one 4.5 stars. Because the slasher elements and horror elements are really good, but also the themes are really good, but also the dream stuff is really good. And even though they didn't have enough of a budget to do really much cooler stuff, they still did some pretty wicked stuff. My quote, "Oh great, now it's my dick that's killing me. Gotta love Kincaid." He's a great character. Sucks that they killed him off in the second film, to be honest, in the fourth film. So they definitely took it to the next level of this film and its surrealist dreamscape, and that works very well. This film feels more tragic for me, as I care a lot more for the kids, of course. as they are patients, but also because I think that the suicide theme that is kind of touched on in the first film and is obviously emphasized a hell of a lot in this one, it's the main theme of this film, it's definitely a lot more powerful, and I think it really works. It makes you sympathize for the characters. Like, I feel like a lot of people would be like, oh, suicide, what the fuck, but like, if you've had it affect your life, then it makes some things just more impactful, and this film is definitely more impactful for me, for that matter. And it definitely makes the slasher elements of the film with the whole characters do get randomly killed off, but like they're done in very unique ways that still posed as suicide. Of course, you have one of the first characters that gets killed off has like his arms and legs like cut open, and he's like being puppeted, like a marionette up to the top of the tower, and then falls. Like, that whole entire scene is quite tense. Not extraordinarily tense, but still rather tense for what the film's going for. And then, of course, you have the famous "It's primetime bitch" scene, so that one is definitely iconic, one for the books, both in terms of practical effects, in terms of delivery, and in terms of just the payoff. Of course, in this film, Nancy comes back, and she's been studying this dream stuff now, and Lawrence Fishburne is in it. Larry, good old Larry. So there are definitely some iconic characters, iconic moments. The idea of them all collectively going into a dream, because of course Patricia Arquette's lead character can bring people into her dream, which of course gives you Freddy Snake, which they even in the behind the scenes stuff talks about how like, oh, it kind of looked pretty phallic. Oops. But of course it was, so they had to kind of repaint it and like reshoot how they would do it, because like they were going from a particular position through the shot composition that makes it look like a dick. So they obviously didn't want to do that. I really like the snake puppet. I think it's really fucking cool. I mean, a lot of people do. Even they in the film admit that they think it's really, like in the production behind the scenes stuff, admit that it looks really cool. And I really like it comes out of nowhere. It's like, and then like she brings in Nancy, and then suddenly what? Nancy is in a dream with another character. This film has like stepped up a hell of a lot. And of course, Freddy recognizes her, and it's just kind of like this kind of cool callback, like, oh, it's you who defeated me last time. I will take my revenge, I guess. So, though, again, I'm not really affected by the horror of this film, except for the thematic horror of the suicide stuff. Its focus on characters that we care about gives the film much more value. Also, its additional backstory to Krueger adds a lot more weight with the whole, oh, his mum was a nun and all this kind of stuff. So that definitely, I think, works quite well. I like the idea that they even brought back Nancy's dad, and they kind of confirmed that, like, yeah, no, her mum definitely died, but we're, like, oh, she died in her sleep. We're not really going to tell you how she died, so you can kind of still, do what you want with it, Like how in Blade Runner 2049, they're like, oh, it might be a replicant, but it might not be a replicant. We don't know. Like, they just, like, they kind of just breeze over it, but in the best way that they could. Okay, is there anything else I should mention about the film? Fuck it, I really like it. Look, honestly, it's my favourite one to watch. It's my favourite one to rewatch. I'm never bored by it. I always like the characters. I don't like Patricia Arquette screaming, I'm sorry. She's a great actress, but holy shit. Like, I mean, by this stage, she's still a kid, but, like, I just don't like her screaming. It's really annoying. And it's the one thing I like about the next film, because they recast her character, the other character doesn't scream in the same way, and it's different, and I like it. But that's just, it's like the only thing I really dislike about this film, outside of the fact that I don't get too, like, a lot of the, oh no, I'm gonna die, / horror stuff I don't really care much about. But I really like the dream stuff, and the kid who's tied up to the bed by the tongues, and God, there's so many things. The girl, the wizard dude, the girl with the drug problem. There were so many creative kills that really work, especially for, like, the dynamic of the 80s. This is still 87, so, like, drugs are a problem, suicide's a problem, sex and drugs and rock and roll, all this kind of stuff. Like, it's all thematically thrown in there, and it works for its specific characters. And it's pretty cool, of course. And you got Kincaid, he's a strong dude. It's cool, it's good. I like it. Of course, rip Nancy, but I mean, I don't mind, sometimes you gotta have that noble, heroic sacrifice. I wasn't expecting it, of course, the first time around, but the second time I was, and I was like, yeah, no, I don't mind it per se when she does, because, it's interesting when she does die, because it's like, her dad gets killed in real life by, a stop-motion version of Freddy's skeleton, and then, because Freddy knows that he's dead, Freddy, kind of turns into him, and it's like, oh, I'm the spirit of your dad, coming to tell you that I've died, but, I still love you, and then stab, turns out, no, it was Freddy the whole time. Oh, he got her. Oh, what a zinger. Good film, worth watching. Now, of course, we get to 1988 with The Dream Master. We're going more into the dream and the title stuff. This one is written by Brian Helgeland, Jim Wheat and Ken Wheat, and directed by Rennie Harlan. I gave it 3.5 stars. My quote, "You're one spooky chick." So, there is a lot happening in this film as it is. You've already got, we're bringing back the 3 remaining characters from the previous film, and then they're all gonna get killed off. But then, the main character, played by Patricia Arquette in the first one, he's gonna pass on her spirit stuff, here is my superpower, I'm giving it to you now, Alice. So then I remember Alice because Alice in Wonderland, I'm sorry. And then, it's now Alice and all of her friends, and her soon-to-be boyfriend, and, everyone else is, and her brother, and the punk rock chick who doesn't like to study, and then the nerdy chick who has asthma, and, they have all these interesting ideas, a punk rock chick doesn't like bugs, so she'll turn into a bug. Practical effect, really cool. And then her getting killed off, also really cool. Kind of strange, but still really cool. And, just all these different elements. Asthma attack girl just gets the air sucked out of her. The brother fights kung fu and then just dies anyway, even though he's obviously proving that he's tougher than Krueger. And of course, the previous lead character from the previous film, who was played by Patricia Arquette, is now, she's just gonna be thrown into a fire and then die. So that's fun. Yeah, I think it's kind of cheap how they killed off all the original 3 characters. Kincaid's one just sucks. He has his dog piss on fucking Krueger's goddamn grave, and now Krueger's back, and then, oh no, now you're gonna get stabbed in the chest. Oh, how iconic. Not really. I do like the other kid. The kid didn't talk much in the previous film, because his death is oh, hey, look, here's this sexy naked chick who's in his waterbed, and then he gets sucked into the waterbed and gets stabbed and drowns. And it's pretty cool and still pretty horrifying, and I have no idea why the hell people have waterbeds. It's the dumbest idea. Anyway, but then for the rest of the film, of course, here is my review. Gotta love how this is basically a psychic chick version of Voltron. Because, of course, when all the characters die, the main ability, you have the strength of Kung Fu, you have the strength of weightlifting and high kicks, you have nerd power, but, also have mostly just that one saying, that one line that we used once, and now we're going to bring it back. And then, yeah. So, main character becomes Voltron. That's alright with me. So, though this film has some lousy dialogue, fuck, that first hour, yikes. And these are all hour-and-a-half long films. These are all 90 to 100-minute long films. So, outside of the lousy dialogue, and, of course, the bizarre way that Krueger is resurrected, it's still quite an entertaining film. The first half kills the last Elm Street kids, which is disappointing, but I guess, you gotta have someone new to connect with and new flesh for Freddy, But also you gotta bring in that way of, how else would Freddy come back to life? What, his bones that had holy water thrown on them will just... No, wait, does holy water go on in this film? Holy water was at the end of the previous one. So, yeah, the holy water being put on him and everything. It's you still can't kill him because gotta have a sequel. It also sets up our new crew with very specific character traits for obvious reasons, whilst also introducing this idea of a Dream Master that I guess is our protagonist. I've watched this film twice now, and I don't know what the hell they're getting at with this Dream Master. Is it meant to be this whole, this person that controls all the dreams? But it's yeah, but is this meant to be like some kind of dream god, or is it meant to be like our main character Alice, who's like, oh, now that I have the abilities of like the previous girl, I guess now I'm the Dream Master, but like they only talk about it twice. Like first it's in like a nursery rhyme, but then it's like we're talking about it in dream class, and even then she falls asleep, so we don't know what the hell the guy gets to when he says Dream Master. So I don't know what the hell getting at. Is it subtextual? Is it not? I don't know. It's just, I don't know. There's just something there that's, it just seems like a background thing by the end of it. Which I think is also because, as they mentioned in the production stuff, the film had a lot of writers, obviously, and that became its own problem because it was a mess in terms of script. You had so many people writing it that probably this whole idea of the Dream Master was like, oh, we'll go with that as the title. We have, two references in the script, but like we don't actually determine what it is, so it's just useless, pretty much. So the second half, of course, barrels into this bizarre, almost elongated montage with amazing practical effects, kills, and 80s lighting work. Which I really like, how the colours of the lighting is like the main colours from like his Freddy Krueger's suit. It's nice that this time they rid themselves of the we have to stay awake parts in favour of the character simply kind of either daydreaming or like maybe they just mention it in passing like, oh, I couldn't get much sleep last night, but it's not because of Freddy, it's because, you know, my best friend died, or because I need to study for an exam and all this kind of stuff. So that's like an interesting way to do that. But then, of course, the characters in the second half kind of course, die really quickly. Like, sometimes they're not even asleep. Like, it's our main characters who are asleep, and the other characters just die anyway. Or, you know, it's just Alice. It's just, she's pretty much, like, asleep because she can't get sleep because of Freddy. And then the other characters who are like, oh, I can't get this, like, you know, I didn't go to sleep last night because I was studying, and then she dies in the study. Like, it's just kind of a mess in terms of in that regard, but it's still fun. There's some really cool kills, so I guess that's what counts. You know, there's not much torment for the characters as well, like, kind of, but not really. Like, I mean, I guess, who are two characters who die in really tormenting ways? Asthma Chick kind of gets tormented by Freddy, but then she just gets scared by him and has an asthma attack, and he just sucks the air out of her. And then, you know, Bug Chick just turns into a bug and gets squashed. So, I mean, there's not really much to it. The pacing keeps moving, doesn't really allow the characters to breathe, so you don't really care about them, but like, oh hey, look, all I'm really here about is for the slasher kills, because it's still an 80s horror film. Overall, it works its way to a unique ending that leaves itself open for a sequel, whilst also giving us enough resolution to move on until then. I do enjoy these creative dream/death sequences, which I think is why I prefer this franchise as the best of the slasher genre. Do I have any behind-the-scenes details to note? I think I do, actually. From the director of Die Hard 2. Of course, he did Die Hard 2 well after this film. This was his first American film, which of course made the producer Robert Shea concerned, because he's like, I don't know if a Finnish guy can make an American horror film, but it turns out he can. So then, of course, we get to 1989 with The Dream Child, written by Leslie Boehm and directed by Stephen Hopkins. I gave this film 3.5 stars. My quote, bon appetit, bitch. This sequel feels like an interesting combination of what we've learnt from Dream Master with the structure and simplicity through theme of the original film. This is actually one of my friends' favourite of the franchise. So it steps back from the extreme and consistent creative kills and gives us a well-paced psychological horror with surreal slasher elements. The kills are more unique and few and far between, so we get more time to understand the characters. I feel like they continue with the idea of that each dream, death, or nightmare sequence either relates to the main theme of pregnancy, or relates to a character attribute. For example, you know, dinner for the model, and her suffocating on her food, and Super Freddy for the comic book nerd, you know. So of course we've got the main two characters back from the first film who were ended up as a relationship couple, this being Alice and her jock boyfriend. But then you got the idea of, like, it starts with a sex scene, but, like, it's, like, a really artistic sex scene, and it's, like, obviously implanting this idea in your mind that, oh, maybe she's pregnant, and then you get this elongated scene of her drowning in the shower, but then it's like, obviously not the same actress because she's like nude the whole time. It might not. It might be the same actress. They didn't really say in the production stuff. Either way, that's an interesting scene. But then, of course, the rest of it, you get more development of the characters. They're all graduated, so they all kind of want to move on with their lives, but they're still being controlled by their parents or by society. And so they have, obviously, these restraints that characterize who they are and what they want and all this kind of stuff. I can understand why, if people go from the previous film to this film, being like, oh, I just want someone to die, just kill someone off already, all this and that, which is why this film got pretty poor reception, because this film was more concerned with becoming more like the original film, which took its time, had some characters get killed off here and there, but took its time to develop the characters and a tense narrative. And this film attempts the same deal, but with the theme of pregnancy, but has some even more creative kills. So yeah, the pregnancy stuff. Upon first watching this, I was kind of confused, but then I started to wrap my head around who Jacob was as the film went along. Jacob, of course, being the kid. But, of course, this time I was able to really appreciate how the theme of pregnancy affects the protagonist. Of course, Alice, again. Much like how teen suicide was the main theme of the third film. Like, they're going more for the theme, strong, heavy themes in terms of that. Not heavy themes, but, like, they're going very strongly on their themes, which I think is really nice. Overall, this film feels like a step down in terms of creative kills, but that's only because there's less of them, meaning you actually remember them more over the previous films' many, even if amazing, kills. This story is more captivating because of its use of theme and how it fleshes out Freddy, which gives him more of something, it gives him something to be afraid of, because who isn't afraid of their mother? And I feel like the friends could have had more fleshed out characters, but I don't mind that, given how their overall character traits were really like all we needed. Like, oh, we get it, it's a model, like she's a model, but she doesn't really want to be, but like her mother's too strict and grooming and stuff, and all this kind of stuff. And the focus of the narrative is on the protagonist, of course, and her, and being pregnant and all that kind of stuff. So it's not a bad entry in the franchise, and of course, it is always creative. However, I feel like Freddy is lacking presence and menace more and more as these films go along. And it's kind of interesting too, because they have the element of we have this kind of Freddy backstory with his mother being a saint and whatever, and then they delve more into it now, 2 films later after the third film. So it's it's the 5th film, let's delve more into Freddy's backstory instead of just having him consistently kill off people. So in the behind-the-scenes stuff, there is a clip of Rachel Talalay, the producer of many of the films in the franchise, as well as the director of Freddys Dead, commenting on her observation of many vaginal-like passageways in the film, in the franchise, especially in Dream Child. I find it interesting that she notes to ask the male directors why this is a thing. I note that because A, it's in her film as well with that kind of a passage, but also B, it's some of them even say it's just because it was the easiest way to shoot some of the scenes to have a circular passageway. So that's interesting. Now, of course, we're on to Freddys Dead, The Final Nightmare from 1991. That's right, we're not doing 80s slasher anymore, it's now the 90s. What? How does that work? So this was written by producer Michael DeLuca and directed by Rachel Talalay. My rating, 1.5 stars. Yikes. Not much I have to say about this film, but kind of, I'm definitely not going to get into the narrative because who gives a shit by this stage. My quote, we're in Twin Peaks here. This film is lousy from its cheesily overacted characters, mostly the male lead and the female lead, to its cheap excuse of a story. Freddy had a daughter, didn't you know? The Every Town Has an Elm Street quote was pretty cool and does, is kind of like this, now we get the franchise to go everywhere because, every town has a Elm Street, which is cool. That was kind of the idea of the franchise, why it was set on Elm Street, because every town has an Elm Street. But this time they kind of slapping you in the face of it. Every town has an Elm Street. We can always have more Freddy films because every town has an Elm Street. So there is that. It does allow, in a way, the franchise to evolve, but given the direction that the franchise has going, has decided to go down, I doubt the evolution is in its DNA. The main problem I have about this film is its lack of horror. None of these supposed scary scenes really work, and most of the kills are just kind of extended gags that, at least for me, aren't funny to begin with. Also, it doesn't really work when the characters aren't, scared of Freddy. Not to mention how apparently Freddy isn't evil enough to will his evil spirit into existence to haunt the Elm Street kids. Instead, there's these dream demons that give him the power, which is so lame. It's like, let's give him the biggest backstory stuff ever. He has a daughter, and his wife found out that, he was the one killing all the kids, and then because she looked in the basement where obviously every man shed kind of stuff, and then it's like, Krueger kills his wife and tells the daughter to, just don't tell anyone, and then she does, and they come and hunt him down, and now he's kind of getting his revenge on her, because he's like, oh, hey, I need you to get me out of this town, because you can, once you're in Springvale, whatever, Springwoods, you can take my spirit and bring me on to another town, because every town has an Elm Street, and yada, yada, yada. And of course, by the end of this lazy, repetitive plot with some weird, weird kills, you of course get Freddy being killed by his daughter, who has brought him into the real world and has his glove and stabs him, and then shoves like a bomb in his chest, and it's like a pipe bomb, and then he fucking blows up. Like, that was an interesting thing of like, the closet has all the weapons that the police still haven't taken yet, and it's like they end up using those at the end of the film, which I think is an interesting use of introduce it there, bring it back later kind of idea. But at the same time, I don't really care. Bringing him into the real world and then blowing him up, it just kind of doesn't. It's pretty dodgy. It doesn't really get for me. And then like his head coming at you, and then like it just kind of opens and envelops, and now there's a second head of him, and then even that explodes into some weird thingy. And then the film just ends. Freddys dead, well, you can all go home now, yay! So, special details. The last 20 minutes is meant to be in 3D. The elongated Freddy origin stuff is so unnecessary, but this film really knows how to run out of, it really shows that it's run out of ideas. Even though the director was like, oh, no, I think that's a really interesting idea to explore his backstory completely, and it's like, but you don't always need to. Like, we get it. He killed kids, and he molested them and shit. And then the parents burnt him alive, and now he haunts the dreams of the kids, of their kids and whatever. That's enough. I don't need any more. I don't mind the fact of like, oh, he was born evil as it was because his mother, who was a nun, was raped by 100 lunatics and whatever. That's again another interesting idea. But then it's like, oh, but then he had a daughter, and then his daughter was the one who ratted him out. Blah, blah, blah. Who gives a shit? They started this film off with 2 quotes, because they started doing this, like, as of, like, Dream Child, they started introducing a quote at the start of the film, which is weird. And this one was, like, one of them was from Nietzsche, which was just kind of, okay, cool, we get it, you think philosophy's cool. And then, I don't mind philosophy, but it's just like, I don't think this film knows what it's talking about. And then the next one is like, welcome to primetime, bitch, from Freddy Krueger. So it's like, oh, hey, remember when he said that? Yeah, we're not going to get any of those lines in this film. No siree. The house turning into Freddy was, the Freddy house was a cool effect. Like, it was just like, oh, they went into a random house. Then look, blood starts dripping down on the door. Then it becomes a stop motion thing of the tree comes out, and then suddenly it becomes the Freddy house. And it's like, that's pretty cool. Probably the only good thing in this whole entire film. The director notes that the film was inspired by Twin Peaks, because that was around when that had come out by the time this film was being made, and Carnival of Souls, a 1960s horror film that I really like. And of course, I love Twin Peaks and David Lynch, and his films and everything else that he's done, and I really like Carnival of Souls. And I feel like the only element that kind of resembled any of this was like the town, when they go back to Springwood, whatever, and there's like the town fate carnival thing, and it's like, oh look, all the adults are gone crazy because there's no kids left, and yada yada yada. It's like, I don't know, it just doesn't really feel like, A, doesn't really feel like it fits the franchise, and B, it just kind of feels weird and bad. So, and it doesn't really, it just like, it feels like an insult to like, Twin Peaks level stuff. Like, Twin Peaks is kooky, yeah, but it's not stupid kooky, it's just kooky. So the 3D was actually a burden for the director, even though it was only used in the last 20 minutes. She wasn't allowed to make a cool ending for Freddy, which she wanted to make this big special effects thing, but they couldn't because she wasn't allowed to use creative camera angles. And like the one thing that like Robert Shea was saying was like, oh, the director really wanted to use really creative camera angles and stuff, but but we had to restrict it because like we wanted to have some kind of cool gimmick for this film, and that was 3D, but we only used it for the last 20 minutes. And the director was like, I wanted to like have all this cool stuff happen and then like have a really cool ending for Freddy, but instead it's like, nope, it's just like he gets things thrown at him and suddenly it's just got some 3D stuff. Stuff that they never even 3D stuff that they'd never even used before, so suddenly it's like, oh no, is this gonna work? So yeah, that kind of was a very big detriment to the film because of course you can't even watch it in 3D anymore. This isn't Friday the 13th 3D. It's Freddys Dead, And last but not least, at the end of this long-ass video, Wes Craven's New Nightmare from 1994. Written and directed, of course, by Wes Craven. I gave it 3.5 stars. My quote, God wouldn't take me. Which fits into the theme of the first one. And this film, this film is very much a reflection of the first film, in terms of the thematics and the characters and of course the meta approach, and then you've got this discussion of God, which I find to be interesting because of course that was a very big insert by Craven himself, and all this other stuff. So even with its meta approach, something I really liked upon first viewing, the film follows a very familiar horror conventions, especially to those of its franchise, and even the narrative conventions of its franchise. Though the theme of motherhood/maternity and its analysis of the psychology of its lead, aka the, what it's like to be an actress from a horror film, and is it a bad idea to show kids horror films, and all this kind of stuff, and what could, watching horror films turn kids, make kids evil and stuff, all they learn from the movies and all this kind of stuff. So that's all, like, in there, not always as fleshed out because you don't always realize it, like, it's more subtextual of like the kid watching a horror movie and all this stuff, but then you have even the doctor and other adults saying like, oh, have you shown your kids your movies? And they're all concerned about it because it's like, oh, it's like a good idea to show your kids your movies. So of course there's that. But of course, all those things and the themes and stuff and the character stuff keep the film going, even though the first half feels very slow and kind of boring. It's like, wait, I don't get it. This is real, but like, it's meta, but like, if it's Freddy back, I don't understand. Like, it's kind of like it doesn't exactly get its footing right, but like it's trying to be kind of clever and unique. And it's like, oh, we're building up these really tense horror scenes, but for me, they just didn't work. But of course, then you get into the second half of the film, and it's just like you understand while it's like, oh, it's actually all the script that like is being written by Craven and used. All this kind of stuff, so it's like you're more or less playing on like Nancy's point of view for the first half, or for the whole film, realistically. But by the second half, she understands that all this is happening in Wes Craven's dreams. So there's that, which is kind of, I guess, the twist. But it's like, yeah, it's kind of weird. Anyway, so I understand the aspect of we have to make Freddy scarier again, but sometimes just showing a kid reenacting the scary parts of the previous films doesn't really do much. Especially when, the film kind of barrels, for me at least, into cringe within its first hour. The kid acting is also pretty crap, but like, it's not terrible, but it's like, it's not great. And there's so much cringe with all the references to the first film. Like, there's stuff that I like about the first half, like her going on the talk show and then Freddy's there, but it's not Freddy, of course, because it's just Robert Englund. Oh, look, it's Robert Englund, all the fans and stuff, and like that interesting aspect of the fan reception. Of course, another meta approach. But then there's the guy who's like prank calling her, kind of, and just, oh, there's so much in this movie, it's ridiculous. And that's just the first half. And all the earthquakes, and then her husband gets killed, and suddenly it's like, oh my god, and she's dreaming of Freddy, and maybe Freddy's killing people because they want to make another movie. Yikes. But then, of course, the second half, on the other hand, really improves on the horror angle and the plot angle. Also, you know, as Wes even notes in the film, the aspect of the murder of innocence is an interesting theme to explore, and I think is actually pretty well done. Like, it's one of those things that they make it on the nose when he says it, but it's like, oh yeah, I see that now. The final act really brings the film into fruition, with classic moments brought back in new and exciting ways, but that doesn't feel cringy because it's all the horror stuff, and it's like, it's really cool and it works because it's actually Freddy doing it. It's not a kid doing it. The finale also sees a fitting end to the new and improved Freddy Krueger, who, as the end credits note, is played by himself. Special features: there are clips that delve into Craven's history as a filmmaker, and that's pretty much it. There's, of course, the final doco, The Life and Crimes of Freddy Krueger. It's an interesting half-an-hour doco that just discusses the making of the film and more or less just Freddy as a villain and looking at other horror villains, and it's narrated by Robert Englund, which I think was a nice touch. Yeah, it's pretty decent. It's definitely worth checking out. Maybe one of the only documentaries outside of the Never Sleep Again one on the first disc that are worth checking out. So, yeah. Excellent. Well, that is the franchise. What is my ranking of them? What do we have? Let's start with number 8, I guess there's 8 of them. Number 8 is Freddys Dead, The Final Nightmare, of course, with 1.5 stars, followed by A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddys Revenge, with 3 stars. Then there's A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master, with 3.5 stars. Freddy vs. Jason, with 3.5 stars. If you want to look at my review for that, check out the Friday the 13th video. It's right at the very end of it. Then, of course, there's New Nightmare from 1994 with 3.5 stars. Number 3 is The Dream Child with 3.5 stars. Number 2 is the original and classic Nightmare on Elm Street with 4 stars. And number 1 is number 3. Number 1, my favourite of the Nightmare films, is Dream Warriors with 3.5 stars. What did I write for Freddy vs. Jason? 3.5 stars. The quote, "That goalie was pissed about something," feels like an Elm Street film with nice uses of Jason and a strange amount of metal music and a very, 2000s costume. Overall, it was fun to see Freddy again. Jason, on the other hand, felt lackluster, but it was pretty cool to see his kills, which is what he's best at. So yeah, I'd say they're all really good films to watch. Wholeheartedly recommend the franchise. And that's about it. Thank you all so much for watching. Feel free to like, share, and subscribe for more. Hopefully this video wasn't too long for you. About an hour. Feel free to check out you can subscribe maybe here. Over here will be the Calm and Relaxed, maybe it'll just be here, Calm and Relaxed playlist with, of course, Terminator franchise, Alien franchise, Fast and Furious franchise, Friday the 13th franchise, and of course Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. I plan to do maybe one a month, one every few months, just because there's a lot of films to get through. And I like it, it's fun to revisit some of these franchises as well. So, yeah, thanks for watching. If you have a franchise you want to suggest to me, then feel free to hit it in the comments. I'm still trying to figure out exactly how I'm going through a lot of these videos, these Calm and Relax ones, but I do like having those extra production notes, even if it makes the video a bit longer. So, hopefully it made it more interesting for you, outside of just me gargling over my reviews. Outside of that, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Adios.